multifaceted personality who will be able to definitely share share his thoughts on translation and enlighten us about the activity of translation, because he is going to speak on translation, light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Sahasrabudhe, please.
Seniors on the dais, seniors of the dais, my colleagues and friends. I'm happy to be talking about translation because I'm a student of translation. I'm currently doing PhD in translation studies, apart from the active translation work that I have done. Translation I have always found as a very interesting and a very complex process. There are a number of approaches to translation. There are many translation theories. A theory looks at translation as a process. Another theory looks at it as a product. It is a more product-intensive approach. There is a theory which speaks of translation as recreation. Translation has been commonly understood to be the process of transferring a written text from the source language into the target language, conducted by a translator in a specific socio-cultural context. It is expected that the translated text should function in the new language, in the target language, and in its milieu, its socio-cultural context. This context sometimes makes it difficult for the translated text, howsoever carefully it may be translated, to function. And it does not function when the readers do not accept it as their own. When the readers feel alienated, distanced from the work, that is the biggest defeat for the translation. But whether a translator achieves a certain amount of success or a certain amount of defeat, the process that he undergoes is like a dark tunnel, and therefore I have titled my submission as Light at the End of the Tunnel, and believe me, it is a real long tunnel to cross. In 1984, when Ms. Justa Holz-Mantari proposed the theory of translational action, she defined translation as, I quote, "Translation is conceived primarily as a process of intercultural communication whose end product is a text which is capable of functioning appropriately in specific situations and contexts of use." Specific situations and contexts of use is something that we need to underline, and we also need to understand that she is defining translation to be an intercultural process. Now the act of, I unquote, the act of bridging two cultures can be very difficult. It is in fact very difficult because the tenets of these cultures are bound to be different. We can begin with simple examples relatively simpler examples like the translations of Harry Potter. This famous novel has so far been translated into more than 40 languages and millions of copies have been sold. As you all know, it is written by a British author, Miss J.K. Rowling. Some of us may be surprised to know that there is an American translation or American version, howsoever you would like to describe it, of this publication by this novel by a British author. For example, part 1 of Harry Potter, which is titled Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when published in the US, is called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So the title itself has been changed, despite the fact that the language is the same, it is English. It is not just that. In the American version, the British biscuits, football and mummy have been changed to become cookies in the American version, soccer and mommy. There are many more lexical changes like these. This is termed as intralingual translation under the theory of Roman Jakobson. Now, when the same novel was translated into Hebrew, the translator thought it fit to substitute the original British names of sweets with traditional Jewish sweets, giving it a truly local flavor. Now, this is something that is difficult for a translator to achieve. On the one hand, the traditional concept of being faithful to the original texts prevents him from changing even the smallest details, because 50 years ago, when we learnt languages by the grammar translation method, it was extremely religiously important to be 100% faithful to the original translation. In one of the translations that I carried out, the original author was very much active and would like to go through my translated version. And he was, of course, a supporter of the faithful theory or the loyal theory of translation, and wanted a word for every word of his, which I had to surrender and tell him that is impossible. I have translated the complete text, and according to me, it is a good translation. I requested him that it may be edited by some other expert translator, but if he insists on every word of his being substituted by another word in the target language, it would be really impossible for me to have my name associated with this. I said, you can take this text, turn into whatever it is, publish it with your name as the translator, because it is impossible to have absolute equity of syntax in two languages which belong to two completely different families. But the cultural gap that we translators suffer from does not stop at, say, cookies and biscuits. That would be relatively much easy to do, understand, as easy as it is to understand biscuits or cookies, whatever way you like to call them. It becomes more serious when you are dealing with what I would like to call the culturally untranslatable elements. And I have been trying to identify, based on my experience and the experience of others, I have been trying to identify the categories of culturally untranslatable elements. If the translator wants his text to function in an alien language, he has to spend huge amount of energy, effort and intelligence apart from his own command over the two languages to make sure that it functions, particularly in those specific cultural contexts and situations that the experts are talking about. He has to understand and appreciate such situations with great empathy, since the alien readers are going to trust his rendering as faithful and therefore acceptable. And therefore, whether he wants to substitute word for word or whether he wants to convey the meaning and the essence of what the original author had to say. He has to decide whatever he does, the alien reader is generally going to trust him, and he cannot betray the trust of the innocent reader. But then faithful rendering, even if you want to do a faithful rendering of an original text, and particularly talking about literary texts, this task is going to be made difficult by massive cultural interference. I'm not using the word interference in any negative sense. It is the result of the finer nuances and intricacies of diverse cultures which go beyond the thousands of pages of good dictionaries. It is these complexities of cultures, different cultures, that lead to culturally untranslatable elements. For example, intense emotions are easily expressed through L1, through the mother tongue or first language. Since authors world over find it very easy to take liberties with the structures of their own languages. They can pull down old structures, tear them apart, and form new syntactical structures or semantic structures, like what the stream of consciousness novels did in the last century. Anything from words to phrases to syntax can be played with. It is really difficult to identify a translator who can do this equally effectively in the target language. However good his command over the target language may be. If he is a native speaker of the target language, he is more often than not likely to be less competent in the source language. 2. The next lot of culturally untranslatable elements are at the semantic level, the figures of speech. They serve as good examples. For example, similes and metaphors are very difficult to translate, just as ethno-specific symbols and images. Number 3, collocations and idiomatic usages, which can be dialect-specific expressions, region-specific phrases, idioms, colloquial expressions, and interjections or exclamations are also very hard to translate. A large body of terminology based in religion by nature is difficult to translate from one language to another. Examples are community-specific rituals, religious customs, traditions and festivals, theology, scriptures, spiritual experiences ranging from simple pranayam in Yoga Shastra to the bizarre world of the occult. These are all very fortified roadblocks in the way of a translator. A simple word like sanskar, which is very common to most Indian languages, I have not so far found an appropriate equivalent in English. I don't even have the word, forget the concept of sanskar. Another example, the Indian word dharma can be translated easily as religion, but dharma has several other connotations and all those connotations may not exactly be expressed by the term religion. For example, if you read Bhagavad Gita, dharma has been used in probably 10 different shades of meanings, which are very difficult to express in translation in any language. Dharma Yuddha, for example, is a concept which is common to Mahabharata and to Gita. Now, you will find in dictionary you will find the word crusade, which refers to the wars between the Christians and the Muslims in the medieval centuries. But crusades again are not the same as Dharma Yuddha. There is a vast, no, the next category is the vast gamut of man-woman relationship, which can be the central theme to so many authors in so many languages of the world. Now, apart from straight man-woman relationships, sex, intercourse, male and female genitals, and related imagery, the third gender, gay and lesbian behaviors, swear words, gender-based abuses, racist abuses, and the slang that surrounds them all. Many of these factors are taboos in the Oriental cultures, whereas their free expression is permissible in the Western cultures, and therefore you will find many of them occurring very easily in the literary texts of European and American countries. In some languages, there are no words. For example, I was told that in northeastern languages, swearing by women, particularly swearing by mothers, which is so common even to some other Indian languages, does not exist, because the concepts that you must, if you want to insult a person, insult him by using wrongly the name of his mother, the concept does not exist in certain northeastern cultures. I am reminded of, when we talk about intense emotions and man-woman relationship, both being very difficult to translate. An example that easily comes to my mind is an 18-year-old Prince of Denmark, Hamlet, telling his 16-year-old love, Ophelia, when he is particularly exasperated with the happenings in his life. He says, "Get thee to a nunnery, get thee go. Why marry and breed a race of sinners?" Now, if you look at the word sin and sinners, sinners here particularly refers to Christian mythology, the original sin, and the concept that the whole of mankind was born out of sin, whether you like it or not. Now, this is something that one can understand, one can paraphrase, but one will find very difficult to translate, because the concept of nunnery and breeding a race of sinners, which goes back to the original sin, the cultural concept does not exist anywhere in India, according to my knowledge, and therefore an expression like this, which is of intense exasperation, depression, you will find it very difficult to translate into Indian languages. Apart from these, I would say, heavy duty items, there are, even when you want to portray day-to-day life, you will find that community specific foods, popular flora and fauna, the localized items, fruits and vegetables, spices, ethnic recipes, ethnic apparel, clothing styles, especially those of women, traditional footwear, and several other related items are so deeply rooted in the age-old civilizations that mere mastery of diction, command over the words, just cannot be an adequate vehicle of expression. When one thinks of Tukaram, very revered poet and my guru, देऊ कासेची लंगोटी नाठाळाचे काठी हाणू माथा. Though it is not impossible to find words for all the words that he has used, This concept of kasechi langoti, which is probably the last thing that a poor man can afford to wear, is again something which is very difficult for a Westerner, for an American, for example, to understand and appreciate, as to why Tukaram Maharaj is offering him kasechi langoti. And kasechi langoti is a relatively milder term that I have used. Another Pathbhed, another version has something else, probably would be considered unparliamentary. This is how a translator feels harassed, particularly when he is into translation of literary texts. Only a translator who is true to his salt will enjoy this harassment. And when he enjoys this harassment, what you get is good translation. I am aware of the fact that what I have stated has some notable exceptions, and one of them is present here in the form of Ms. Uma Kulkarni, whose rendering of texts is impeccable. Some of you would have probably read a novel by Dr. S.L. Bhairappa. I'm sorry, I don't remember the original name in Kannada, but she has translated it as Parva, which interprets Mahabharata in the modern terms. Wonderful translation. It's a huge novel, and the beginning to end you read it and you will never realize that it is translation. So I know that there are mighty translators who can transcend such limitations, and therefore when I begin to translate something, I try to see some light at the end of this long tunnel, which ultimately I have to reach. And if I succeed in crossing this tunnel successfully, well, there will be light at the end, not only for me as translator, but so many readers of another culture, of another ethnicity, religion and nationality, who probably will enjoy in the light of the translated text the way Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore, when translated well, won him the Nobel Prize. Thank you for giving me this opportunity and listening to me so patiently.